Prison Policy Delivery and Reform. I'm Andrew Hordley, Director of Reform, which is an independent, non-party think tank whose mission is to find a better way to deliver public services and economic prosperity in the UK. Well, here we are, a packed room. I'm absolutely thrilled that such a senior group can join us for this event this morning, the week before Christmas. Everyone's not shopping, they're here to discuss policy. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Thank you. And perhaps the breadth of this audience is a reminder of the tremendous help available to ministers in the public sector and the private sector and the third sector when they come to this key area of policy. I'm of course delighted to be able to introduce David Lidington, Secretary of State for Justice and Lord Chancellor, to speak this morning to take questions. David, I think we first met 20 years ago, oh my God, 20 years ago, when we were both trying to help William Hague run the Conservative Party, you in a very senior way, me not really in a very senior way. Since then, you've held many senior roles in the party, of course becoming Secretary of State for Justice 6 months ago. From our side, David, your department has engaged brilliantly with our work, which we have hugely appreciated. We helped Liz Truss launch the Prison's White Paper around a year ago. We have met your officials to discuss our thoughts on measuring prison performance and new ideas for public-private partnership. Sam Giemer has spoken for us, and now you are delivering this major speech today. So we really appreciate it, as I say. So how we will run this morning, very simple. David will speak to us. I will chair a Q&A, and we will finish no later than 11 o'clock. So, Secretary of State, we're thrilled you're here. Please do speak to us.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed. It's always slightly frightening to be reminded by somebody how long you've known them. You know, it goes back to the days when we both had more hair and perhaps slightly less greying around the gills. But reform under your leadership goes from strength to strength in terms of generating debate about policy ideas. It's always said that one of the biggest challenges for a party that is in government is how to try to refresh its intellectual energy and its exposure to ideas that require a bit of lateral thinking. And it's, I think, of critical importance for Theresa May and for the government now that we have think tanks like Reform that will help ministers and their teams to do that thinking and to engage in that kind of debate. I want to start, before I should go on to the nitty-gritty about prisons, just to start with a point of principle about the purpose of prison. Because for me the purpose of prisons is twofold. It's first of all to keep safely and securely those people, mostly men, but also smaller numbers of women and teenagers who've been sent there by the courts. But at the same time, its purpose is to seek to rehabilitate prisoners, to use the time that they spend in custody to make it more likely that after they've been released, they will live law-abiding lives, that they'll be able to accept their responsibilities as citizens and contribute positively to the community in which they live. And I want to get one thing very straight, as far as I'm concerned. It is being sent to prison that constitutes the punishment, because that means the loss of liberty, the loss of a right to come and go as we please, to lead our lives in the way that we choose, something that probably after life itself is the most precious freedom that any one of us possesses. And it should be a key principle that it is the deprivation of liberty that constitutes the punishment. And prison conditions themselves should be decent and humane and organised in such a way as to encourage and contribute towards successful rehabilitation. And that is why I'm committed to continuing Liz Truss's prison modernisation programme, which, as Andrew said, she announced here a year ago, creating thousands more modern prison places that are fit for the future, and which, incidentally, are much cheaper to operate, place for place, than places in our ancient Victorian prisons. Prison should be a last resort. That is what the law says, after all. And it's a sad truth, there will always have to be people who will have to be imprisoned, either because they would be a serious danger to public safety if freed, or because the crime they've committed is so serious that only a prison sentence will do to give the victim a sense that justice has been done and to mark society's rejection of the crimes. But I believe too that people don't want to see our prison population forever rising. I certainly want to see numbers come down from their current record levels. And we need to look constantly at how to ensure that we have a range of tough community sentences as alternative options, options in which both judges and the general public feel that they can have confidence. We also need to remember in planning policy that all but a tiny handful of prisoners will one day be released. And I think the public is entitled to expect the state to do its utmost to ensure that an offender who leaves prison is less likely to return. After all, each and every time someone comes out of prison and reoffends, there is a victim at the receiving end of that offence. And it's only by tackling reoffending and the reasons behind it that we will make society safer in the long run and protect people from becoming future victims of crime. Making a prisoner less likely to reoffend when he's released starts with having safer and more secure prisons, and that has been my focus since the summer. And of course, knowing where and what the problems are and having a plan to fix them doesn't make the task itself an easy or straightforward one. Change isn't going to happen overnight. Results will take time. But we are making some progress. Now, I know that some, including some here, were disappointed that due to parliamentary time we were not able to carry forward the Prisons and Courts Bill in the form that had reached Parliament ahead of this year's general election. But I understand those concerns, and I'm clear that we can and we are continuing to reform our prisons. And I'm keen in particular to take forward by administrative means as many as possible of those areas highlighted in the bill on which I'm able to take action. If we look, for example, at my announcement this month on introducing an urgent notification process, that was something which the Chief Inspector challenged me directly to do by administrative means when the bill could not be proceeded with. And that is a commitment that I was determined to deliver on, and which I have now introduced. It means that the Chief Inspector can now go directly to me when there is an urgent and significant concern about a prison, and as Secretary of State I will be required to respond within 28 days and in public with an action plan to turn the prison around. And where reform does need legislation, we're active in seeking legislative vehicles, for example, through private members' bills, such as Maria Caulfield's that's before the House at the moment. The key point is that we strive to deliver reform and change right now, and I reiterate today my determination to do just that. Every day, my office receives a report detailing all the incidents from the prison service over the previous 24 hours. And the most troubling updates often involve violent attacks on staff. One recent report described how 3 prison officers had suffered injuries while breaking up a fight. One had a broken nose, another bruising to the head. They were all taken to hospital. Despite their injuries and their ordeal, having been checked out of hospital, all 3 of those prison officers wanted to return to work straight away and were back on duty that same day in order to complete their shifts. And I think that demonstrates the level of dedication and determination that our prison staff have. And it's true probably that we, and I think probably we as a country, don't thank them enough. So I want to take the record today, to take the opportunity today to put on record my thanks for the work they do, day in and day out in our prisons. It is tough work, but it is important work. And no prisoner should go to work in fear of being attacked. Now, this is something I've talked about with my colleagues, the Home Secretary, and with the Attorney General. And we are, all three of us, very clear indeed that an assault inside a prison should be investigated and, where there is evidence, prosecuted with as much rigour and determination as if that assault had taken place outside the prison gates. Where a member of staff has been assaulted by a prisoner, then that prisoner should, if the evidence is there, face justice, meaning prosecution and an appropriate sentence. That's what happened recently with the prisoner Martin Marland, who attacked an officer at HMP Liverpool by wrapping a ligature around his neck. He was charged with attempted murder in October and is now serving 11 years and 8 months. The government is also supporting Chris Bryant's private members' bill to further protect our public service workers, including prison officers. They, after all, are at the sharp end, helping to create order and calm, and we need to help them to improve safety. We have now surpassed the halfway point in our target to recruit 2,500 extra prison officers, something that Liz announced here last year, with a net increase of 1,255 officers since last year. But safety comes not just in numbers, safety comes in also having the right tools and resources to keep yourself and prisoners safe. That's why in the last 6 months we've ensured that every prison officer in England and Wales has access to body-worn cameras. We've introduced new police-style handcuffs and restraints, and we are trialling the use of pepper spray in situations where a prisoner is armed with a weapon. I think that these will make a significant difference in staff being able to manage violent incidents. But alongside that, it's important to look at the reasons why violence occurs. And the overriding trigger for violence, harm and disorder in prisons is the availability of drugs and other contraband, and in particular the game-changing impact of spice and other new psychoactive substances in the last couple of years, the trade in which is being actively promoted by organised criminal gangs both inside and outside prison. Now, that's why it's important that we've been upgrading our detection measures across the prison estate. But I want to show you an example of what we're up against. Now, this will be familiar, I suspect, to a lot of the experts here, but this is a fully functioning mobile phone. It's no bigger than a lighter. It's nearly 100% plastic, and it is available to buy online from sites like Amazon, eBay, and Gumtree. And a quick Google yesterday showed me that you can buy a miniature phone just like this for about £25 on the market. Get one inside a prison and it could fetch up to £500 there. Probably by way of a debt, which a prisoner who wants one agrees to undertake, putting him in hock to the gang bosses, both inside prison and after release as well. A huge markup, and obviously a huge financial incentive for the gangs. And again, there will be experts here who will know only too well how these are smuggled in to prisons. For anybody who doesn't, the size and shape will give a clue. It is a constant challenge. Many of the advertisements are actually accompanied with the slogan, "Beat the boss." And to most people, that might seem like the product gives you an opportunity to play a prank on your boss at work to get one over them. But in fact, it's a reference to the boss chair, a piece of equipment used by prisons to detect a hidden mobile phone that may be concealed about a prisoner's person. And it's pretty clear to me that these miniature phones are being manufactured and sold with the purpose of being smuggled into prisons. Why, after all, are they also advertised as being without any metal components? And so today, I am calling on online retailers and trading websites to take down products on their platforms that are clearly intended to be used to evade detection measures in prison. I have written to Amazon, eBay and Gumtree, and I am keen to work with them to achieve this, because we all, and perhaps especially reputable retailers, we all have an interest in seeking to limit and cut off the opportunities that are available to organised crime. We now also have the technology to block a mobile phone from receiving a signal in prison. And we're going further. I mentioned that we're legislating where we need to. Maria Caulfield's private members' bill, which has government backing and received its second reading in the House of Commons earlier this month, will enable mobile network operators to make use of their special technical knowledge and expertise to prevent, detect and investigate illicit mobiles. And these measures to target illegal phones will, I believe, help us to build on the success we saw last year in recovering record hauls, seizing 35 phones a day and uncovering 7,000 SIM cards across the prison estate. This year too, we have seen prisons delivering results. Just last month, we saw a successful raid in HMP Hewell. This followed months of very careful, painstaking intelligence work and planning involving prison staff from across the country, specialist security and search teams. They uncovered 79 mobile phones, 29 improvised weapons, and a large quantity of drugs. Now, we should recognise these as important successes, yes, and they're the result of much hard work and investment in intelligence and detection capability. But it also demonstrates the scale of the problem we face, because the fact is our prisons are facing a clear and present danger from well-organised individuals and criminal networks. These are networks that are every bit as professionally operated as a legitimate business, but they happen to be engaged in criminal activity. And over the past few years, these gangs have exploited opportunities to target and profit from what is literally a captive market in prisons. And just as the gangs have taken advantage of miniature mobile phones, so too they've used technologies like drones to aid their criminal activity. Smuggling has gone from the crude and opportunistic, a friend or family member chancing their luck and throwing a bag of drugs over a prison wall, that still goes on apace, to sophisticated and systematic, complex supply chains overseen by professional criminal gangs delivering and dispatching contraband on a commercial scale. So as well as responding to security problems, we must also get onto the front foot if we are to stay ahead of the criminals. And in essence, that means we need to get more strategic in our approach to security, recognising that detection and seizure is our last line of defence, and our first line is to take the fight to the criminal gangs themselves. That is why we have been boosting and increasing our expenditure on intelligence-led operations. Police officers are now working alongside prison officers to expose the criminal gangs, to stop them in their tracks and bring them to justice. And I think it's fair to say that HMPPS today is working more effectively in terms of intelligence sharing and cooperation with the police and the security intelligence agencies than at any time in its previous history. We have now seen 28 convictions and combined sentences of more than 82 years for those involved in drone attacks against prisons. And that includes 11 gang members convicted only last week, to a total of 32 years between them, for using drones to smuggle drugs, phones and weapons into prisons on a commercial scale. Those convictions will make prisons safer and more secure, and send a clear message to those involved in these gangs that we will track you down and you will feel the full force of the law. But there is, at the end of the day, no magic bullet, no single solution, no panacea to the problem our prisons face. But through this greater focus on intelligence-led work, through our use of technology in prisons and tackling the criminals' exploitation of technology, I believe we can, and we are, bringing about a more calm and ordered environment that protects staff and prisoners alike. And we can try, therefore, to create environments where offenders can turn their lives around and turn their backs on crime. I know that's easier said than done. Safe and secure prison environments are just the foundation for successful rehabilitation. We know that nearly 2/3 of prisoners serving sentences of less than 12 months reoffend within a year of release. And when you're confronted with a statistic like that, it can feel like too big a challenge to turn around. It's also the case that the prison population presents us with virtually all of the social problems that we find in this country in their most acute and concentrated form. And many people here will know the figures already. Half of young offenders going into custody have a reading age no greater than the average 7 to 11-year-old. Truancy, exclusion from school, experience of local authority care, having been a victim of childhood abuse. These are features in which in the prison population you find represented much more commonly than in the population as a whole. Perhaps most tragically, something like 2/3 of the sons of prisoners end up offending themselves. But against that, I just want to read you 3 success stories that should give us the belief that things can change. And they're not the words of politicians or prison governors or even the chief inspector. They come from offenders themselves. First one said this: Bernie made me feel supported, that I have a life to live after prison. I felt like giving up. She gave me the encouragement I needed to make positive changes to my life. Or, Anna has helped me to understand that violence isn't the only option and helped me express my feelings in a controlled, calm environment. She's always been there for me when I need her. Or third, my life for me ended when I went to prison. Vicky helped me to look up and forward and not to stay in the past. And the common strand in those 3 statements: hope, yes, self-reflection, yes, and encouragement, yes. But what they also all share is that these were stories about a named person, a prison officer or another member of staff working in that prison, whom the offender felt was on their side, who was looking out for them, who listens, who understands, who can help them to turn things round. And I want to see more Bernies, more Vickies, and more Annas supporting offenders in both our prison and our probation service, and in turn more changed outlooks and changed behaviours from offenders like those whose testimony I just read out. Now that is why we're recruiting thousands more prison staff, and why we're rolling out the new offender management custody model in which every offender will have a key worker to guide, support and coach them, and each prison officer in his or her turn will be responsible for about half a dozen named offenders in the prison where he or she works. And it's through our prison and probation officers working directly with offenders that we will help them turn their lives around and make them less likely to reoffend. And that's why we're not only increasing numbers, but also seeking to bring people into the prison service from other sectors to bring fresh perspectives and different experiences. It's why we're recruiting and investing in the leaders of tomorrow, for example, through our Unlocked scheme, which is attracting graduates and those looking for a career change into the prison service. And I met recently a number of the first cohort of graduates who started in August as they undertook their cell-searching training in one of the prisons in the home counties. I was very struck by their enthusiasm and their passion and their diverse range of backgrounds. And one was a banker, another had come straight from university looking for a first graduate job working as a prison officer. And what struck me about all of them was that they were not applying for the Unlocked scheme because they couldn't think of anything else. They brought to their training, to their future work, a real sense of vocation in seeing the job of a prison officer as giving them an opportunity to make a difference for the better to the society of which they were a member. Now, in building a strong workforce that's focused on improving outcomes for prisoners, we also need to make sure that our staff are more reflective of the prison populations they oversee, and in particular better understand the needs of black and minority ethnic individuals. We know that it's a sad truth, but the quality of relationships with staff, it's a generalisation, but it is poorer for ethnic minority prisoners than for others. And as the Lammy Review found, this group disproportionately feels that they are treated unfairly and that the justice system is stacked against them. It is a fundamental principle of our justice system that everyone is treated equally before the law. And no matter what your background, everyone should be treated equally and have the same opportunity to turn their lives around. That will be at the heart of our response to the Lammy Review, which I shall be publishing tomorrow. Delivering secure, reforming prisons will depend upon us in continuing to invest in our workforce, and that includes nurturing strong local prison leadership. That is why we are giving new powers to prison governors, so that they have greater freedom to decide how to run their prisons and design the support and services that will meet the needs of the prisoners who are in their care. And I want to pay tribute to the pioneering work that my predecessor Michael Gove initiated to give greater autonomy to prison governors. Since April this year, all governors have had a greater say over the provision of health care within their prisons and the programmes run there to help change offender behaviour. They've also had greater freedom to determine how they organise their staff and spend their budgets. In October this year, we devolved the budget for family services, so governors can choose now how to spend money on services like visitor centres and parenting skills classes. And over the coming year, we will give them more powers in education and training so they can commission services like libraries and workshops. And looking forward, as existing national contracts come to an end, I want to find ways in which to enhance further the autonomy that governors have. There is obviously a judgment to be made about the balance between economies of scale by doing things at a national level and the benefits of being able to tailor a service to local or regional requirements. But I'm keen to explore, as contracts for things like procurement of food, for repairs and maintenance, fall in at the end of their term, whether these are functions that could be better exercised either by individual governors or by a cluster of governors in a group of regional or sub-regional prisons working together. Now, over the last 6 months, it's been inspiring to meet governors and to talk to them about how they're pursuing innovative local initiatives that work for their prison, and to talk to prison officers who are passionate about the positive change they can make. It's also been an experience to listen to prisoners who've taken up opportunities as they look towards life beyond the prison gates. So while I'm not going to pretend that there are not serious problems and challenges affecting our prison system, I have also seen the evidence of what can be, what is being achieved. And that enables me to feel both optimistic and ambitious for what it is possible to achieve. But I want to conclude by also saying this. The challenge of turning around the lives of offenders and of reducing our stubbornly high reoffending rate cannot just be borne on the shoulders of our justice system. And I believe if we are to rise to this challenge successfully, we need to mobilise more of government, and we need a concerted effort right across the public sector. If we look at employment, we know that finding a job shortly after someone is released means that they are less likely to re-offend. Yet only 17% of recently released prisoners report being in employment a year after their release. That is why we are introducing the new Futures Network to build links between prisons and local employers, and to promote to employers the benefits of hiring ex-offenders. And it's why I'm seeking to encourage other government departments to join the Ministry of Justice in stepping up our efforts to ban the box and to give offenders who apply for a job in the public sector the chance to compete on a level with other applicants. Or take accommodation. We know that having the right accommodation on release is vital to ensure that a prisoner is able to get back on his own feet. You need an address to apply for a job, you need an address to apply for benefits. Yet 30% of those released from prison didn't have suitable accommodation on their first night of release. And yet, having a job, having a roof over your head, having access to the right health treatments, again, something for which you need an address, is vital if that ex-prisoner is to have the best chance of not falling back into crime and creating more victims. So I want us to get much better at putting prisoners at the heart of the wider work of government. I'm working with Cabinet colleagues to look at how their departments can target prisoners and ex-offenders with the support they need to find a job, a home, to get help with debt or get treatment for a drug addiction. Because if we can achieve that and bring the reoffending rate down, we are sparing thousands of potential victims of the trauma of being burdened or assaulted or robbed in the future. Let me give you just one example. I've agreed in the last couple of weeks with Sajid Javid that my department will work with the Department for Communities and Local Government to develop a pilot project focused on enabling offenders to access and sustain tenancies following release from prison, building on existing government support for those who are at risk of homelessness. And we shall be saying more about this in the new year. Prisons can be magnifying glasses for wider problems and inequalities in society. By ensuring prisoners have the right services and support, we can reduce the chances of them ending up committing more crime, ending back in prison, and starting the cycle of crime all over again. So I believe that we are, more slowly than I would wish, but we are making our prisons safer and more secure. And whether that is as a result of more prison officers who are better equipped with the right tools to deal with and reduce violence, whether it's by improving our use of technology, or from tracking down the criminal gangs that are destabilising our prisons and bringing them to justice, each of those initiatives contribute to that central objective. And I think those efforts are starting to make a difference on the ground. But safety and security are only the foundation. Real rehabilitation will come from supporting the day-to-day hard work of prison and probation staff who can build those positive and constructive relationships with offenders. It will come by empowering the prisons, led by their governors, to design the support and the services that will work for them. And it will come when we stop seeing the prospects our prisoners face on release as a problem solely for the justice system, but rather as a call to action for all of government, for voluntary organisations, for the wider public sector, and for employers as well. Our prison system has faced tough times, but with a determination to stabilise the situation on the ground and a concerted effort to support prisoners on release, I believe we have an opportunity to break that cycle of crime, to reduce re-offending, and ultimately to create a safer and fairer society for all the people of this country. Thank you very
much. David, thank you very much. You stay there, and I'll take questions. Hands flooding up already. I will only say, David, we're all here because I think we wanted to see you, open your mind and your heart so we can see how you're approaching this task, and I think you did that admirably, so thank you. We've got 50 minutes or so. I'm going to start with the national media who are here. That's all right, but I can see all the other hands. So I can see Danny Shaw at the back. Can I just ask if there's any other journalists who I see on the line there? So we'll start with, we'll take questions together. So I'll take these two questions. So Danny and then Sir, go on.
Justice Secretary, I've heard you say several times now that you want to see the prison population come down, and that is your aim. And clearly, if you reduce reoffending, that's one way of getting fewer people sent to prison. But would you accept that there are people in prison at the moment who ought to have been given community sentences instead? Are there people in prison who shouldn't actually be in prison? And what changes would you introduce in terms of sentencing to get those numbers down?
Well, I think. That's fine. You take it for it. I'll do the break.
Probably got that wrong. Did you want to? There we go. Do you want to just introduce yourself, sir?
Yes, Carl Dinnan from ITV News. Just on the numbers of prison officers, we all know that you are increasing the numbers, but not by as much as they had previously come down by. Is the number that you're putting in going to be enough, or do you think you will have to ask for more?
Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Danny, point one is that we are taking steps, we have taken steps to use the various tools that are administrative tools that are available to ensure that those who can be released safely are being released. So, for example, we have given Nick Hardwick and the Parole Board additional resource so that they have been able to get through more reviews of the indeterminate sentence prisoners, and we've had record numbers released over the past 12 months. We are doing something comparable in terms of home detention curfew, because I think it is important that governors know that the systems and tools are there, so if they judge somebody could safely be released using tagging towards the end of their sentence, then we get on and we do that. I'm having a look at release on short-term licence as well. This is something that prison officers themselves have said to me when I've been going around the prisons. they would like to see used more, particularly if it can be used to allow a prisoner towards the end of his sentence to commute to work from the prison as part of reintegration into society. It does mean on getting more employers who are willing to make those offers of work in the first place. I mean, your point about community sentences. I talk to judges about this, and I think that we do need to look at how supervision, how the operation of community sentences is working, because we should be in a position where a judge, when sending somebody to prison, genuinely feels that that is the right thing to do, given the gravity of the offence, and not that there is something inadequate about the community alternatives, and therefore send somebody to prison for that reason only. But at the end of the day, we have to send people to prison. We have to accept people to prison whom the courts, which are rightly independent, say should go to prison. So I have to plan policy on the basis of being able to house those people whom the courts send there. And if we look at the biggest single driver of the increase in prison numbers in the last few years has been the increase in the number of sex offenders coming through the system, both the historic sex offences and the fact that more complainants, usually women, are coming forward, the complaints are being treated more seriously, more prosecutions are being brought, and so it's the biggest rise in the population has been in those who are sentenced for 4 years or more. So while you're looking at the boundary between the community sentences and prison for recidivist lower level offenders is important, and we should do that. This goes back to what I said earlier about there not being a panacea, because somebody who's been sentenced for a serious sexual offence, I think that there would be few people who would argue that prison is not the appropriate penalty. For Carl's point about prison numbers, the 2,500 that Liz Truss negotiated was, remember, a net increase overall. So we're making very good progress there. I think that the key thing to remember is that it is not just the numbers, important though the numbers are. It is that we are using that to make it possible to introduce the new offender management model, where you will have each officer directly responsible for about 6 named offenders. And I think operating like this sort of team basis will make for a better quality regime than perhaps the kind of regimes we've been able to operate in the past.
Thank you. I just go with the order of hands that I saw. So I'm going to start it in this corner. So Francis Toy, if you put your hand up, Francis, and then we'll come to the second row. Second row in front row. Francis Toy.
Secretary of State, Francis Toy from Unilink. Back in October, HMP Wayland attracted a fair bit of media publicity following a positive HMI inspector's report about investment. Only one newspaper took a negative angle, which had a cartoon of a couple of prison officers outside the prison looking into a hole saying, "Check all the cells, someone's trying to break in again." What that displays an attitude that you are running some sort of 4 or 5 star hotel chain, which, from visiting many prisons, is obviously far from the truth. I just wanted to ask the question, to what extent would you allow such distortions to influence policy?
Very good. We'll come forward to the second row, please. Madam, that's it, Francis. You can pass
thank you.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Secretary of State. Debbie Akers from Landsec. We met a few months ago actually talking about employer engagement. You have mentioned release on temporary licence, and it was one of the things that we've been talking about for a long time. We run bespoke construction training in prisons, which we are expanding. And I really wanted it's more of a plea really around what are the timescales for release on temporary licence, because it's just so critical in terms of the employment piece. So, and especially for construction as well, we have a huge skills shortage in the industry. So, the more guys that we can get trained and into employment, and we have really noticed a significant difference since release on temporary licence has reduced.
Thank you. And would you just pass the microphone forward to David?
Secretary of State, I remember in October 1998 the shock horror when the Office of National Statistics produced their figures of psychiatric morbidity in prisons. And the figures for mental health problems in prisons are appalling, actually. And I once went to Britain, and there the French were experimenting in automatically sending everyone from Brittany back to Brittany who had a mental health problem from a prison because they recognized that transition, although offending, yes, but transition for mental health treatment also mattered. And I wondered what your response was going to be to the Public Accounts Committee report, which has just been published.
Thank you. Over to you, Dave.
I mean, to take those three to Francis first of all. Yeah, I mean, I have never been into a prison with and left thinking I'd really like to spend time living there. You know, I think that fact of the deprivation of liberty, the separation from family, the inability to decide, you know, when you have a meal, or what you have for a meal. I mean, it is a big constraint on life. I think that I think that no one that I have seen in prison, I wouldn't support such a cause. But I think conditions should be decent and they should be humane. And I am keen to encourage the prison service to talk more about the success stories. You know, there's some remarkable work going on, both with training providers, with employers running workshops to training people to apprenticeships inside prisons, and the evidence suggests that sort of approach does have an impact on reducing reoffending, because you get people into a job afterwards. You know, when I was at Brixton a couple of weeks ago, and we had a breakfast meeting at the Clink restaurant, and actually, you know, people going from there with the right qualifications to work in a commercial kitchen or as a waiter into the hospitality sector outside, and their measured reoffending rate was significantly below the average for that prison or for the country. So we should talk about the good things that prisoners. There will be, you know, bad news stories from time to time as well. I think that is some people will reoffend because it requires a change of heart and a commitment by the prison. Debbie's point about Rockwell, I mean, I get this, and we will take this forward as quickly as possible. You will understand, Debbie, that there is a balance that I have to strike, because you know you must have regard to public safety when considering the individual prisoner suitability. And I think it's right that the end of the day, it's probably got to be the governor who has access to the detailed reports on that particular man or woman. But we also need more employers to come forward and say, look, I will give this opportunity to a prisoner, so you can arrange for the daily commute on temporary licence in that last stage of the sentence. Lord Ramsbottom's point about mental health is well made. It is one of those areas, and as Javid on housing, and I know I'm discussing with Jeremy Hunt how we can improve things. The PSC report was salutary. The government will, of course, be providing a full response to that, as we would for any Select Committee report. There are a number of recommendations directed to my department and to HMPPS, quite a number for Department of Health and NHS England as well. So clearly with the two sides of government will need to have a consolidated response to that, but I'm under no illusions about the importance of getting this right and driving through some improvements.
Thank you. We're going to try and do 3 questions in 5 minutes, so maximum speed. We're going to start in the front row. We'll go to Malcolm Dean of The Guardian, and then right at the back, please. So introduce yourself.
I'm David Munro. I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner for Surrey. Thank you for mentioning accommodation. I'm told it's absolutely central to rehabilitation. We have 3 women's prisons in Surrey, and of course a lot of them are released into the community. I'm also told that their offender journey is different from men's, not special, but different. I wonder if you'd like to expand on how we're actually helping women offenders in particular.
Thank you. And if we pass the microphone back to Malcolm Dean, there we are, and then we'll be ready, please, to take the microphone all the way back. Please, go on, Malcolm.
Thank you for such a refreshing speech, really refreshing. Where do you think we have got with penal populism? As you will well know, between 1952 and 1992, the prison population went up by 11,000, and then when penal populism began with Michael Howard and Tony Blair, it went up twice as fast. It went up by 22,000, i.e. 8 times as fast as the previous 4 decades. Has it now subsided as where you sit? And having given the judges huge extra sentencing powers, what about that?
Thank you. And we'll just rush the microphone back to the room for our last question. Thank you, Daniel.
Secretary of State Peter Dawson from the Prison Reform Trust. I think you know, Secretary of State, there's a prisoner at the moment who is lucky enough to have a job and lucky enough to get out of their cell will spend their entire week's wages using the legitimate telephone within about half an hour. When are you going to reduce telephone charges for people who want to use phones that they are?
Thank you, Secretary of State.
Right. David's points. I mean, if you look at the pattern with women offenders, there will be far fewer who have a history of violence, almost self-evidently, very few will have any history of sexual offending, a greater incidence probably of mental health problems, alcohol problems very, very often. The extra complication, of course, with quite a large number of women prisoners who have dependent children themselves, a lot of women prisoners who have themselves been on the receiving end of domestic violence and domestic abuse of some kind. Now, again, I would say there's no one way to turn that round, and I have asked Philip Lee to rework the department strategy on female offenders, and we will be saying something about that before very much long. I think it'll be early in 2018. We'll be saying something about that, and of course the government is also taking through a strategy on domestic violence and domestic abuse. And while one element of that will be legislation, there is also a need for a comprehensive non-legislative approach to try to get at the underlying causes of domestic abuse and domestic violence, and to get a change in social culture to try and it has proved in the past with unrelated things like drink driving. It's socially unacceptable. Now we need to try to get to a world in which domestic abuse is seen as similarly unacceptable. Penal populism. I think I've been in constituency for 25 years now. I think the public want, it's both things. I mean, the public want to feel that somebody who has committed a serious crime, in particular, is adequately punished. I mean, I think that is fair for the victim, and I think what gets people angry and upset is when they think that somebody is getting away with it, and that the loss that the victim has had to bear is much greater than the punishment that has been meted out to the offender. But I think when you talk to people, you do find that actually they accept that people are almost all going to be released, and that the job of prisons should be to make it more likely that those men and women will be able to play a positive contribution in society. And I think, you sit down with most people, in the country, they get that both elements are right and have to be held in balance. On Peter's point about telephones, yeah, I've seen, actually, it was at Bronzefield, in one of the women's prisons in Surrey. I saw the impact of telephony being available in the prison to prisoners, and it meant that those women were able to keep in contact with family members. It meant, if in the middle of the night they had a crisis of some kind, they could talk to a friend or family, or they could talk to they could ring Samaritans or somebody like that, and talk in absolute confidence in the way that you or I would be able to do facing such a crisis. Now, clearly, for I want to see greater telephony available, because I think it makes for calmer and better functioning prisons. Also, people touch base with their lawyer, perhaps sometimes, and without having all the rigmarole of a visit being arranged. But I also, I think that that has to be managed, and clearly we have to have a system where prisoners can't just use an in-cell phone system to keep in contact with the gang that they might have been a member of outside, or let alone to try to take part in further criminal activities. So you've got to have systems for monitoring or for blocking off certain numbers. But the principle of actually having a managed, monitored, accessible telephone system is something that, as we move forward with prison modernisation, we want to make greater use of.
David, thank you very much indeed. I'm so sorry to those people I haven't been able to take questions from. Time is tight. There'll be many more reform events of this kind. David, thank you. I will just close by saying that we listened raptly to everything you said. You were absolutely clear-eyed about, if one might call it, the challenge, but you also said you were optimistic and ambitious about the way forward, and I think that's absolutely right. We were thrilled to hear your thinking this morning. Can I thank then everybody here today? We really, really appreciate your time at Reform. This is our last policy event of the year. Happy Christmas to everyone. Please join us again in 2018. I really do believe that by bringing groups together like this to combine the political leadership and the experts in all of the sectors that we cover, then we can have better policy and so better public services as a result. But if that's the case, we can only do that with your support. So thank you enormously for your time this morning. Thank you very much indeed to the Reform team who make my life very easy. It's not easy to put on events like this so professionally, but I'm very, very grateful to them. Thank you. And let us close by thanking again David. Thank you.